It started as just another musical night on The Tonight Show, until Jimmy froze, mid-laugh. The studio lights bathed Studio 6B in their familiar warm glow, casting dancing shadows across the iconic Tonight Show set. The audience of 300 was electric with anticipation, their laughter still echoing from Jimmy's opening monologue. The Roots provided their signature smooth jazz backdrop, Questlove's drums, keeping perfect time with the energy that made late-night television magic happen night after night. Jimmy Fallon sat behind his desk in his perfectly tailored navy suit. That boyish grin spread across his face as he shuffled his note cards. Tonight's musical guest was someone special, not a chart-topping superstar, but a young singer-songwriter who had captured hearts with a viral video of him performing on street corners to pay for his mother's medical bills. 23-year-old Dylan Martinez had driven 18 hours from a small town in Nebraska carrying nothing but his guitar, a dream, and something else nobody in that studio knew about yet. "All right, everybody," Jimmy announced, his voice carrying that infectious enthusiasm that had made him America's favorite late-night host. "Our musical guest tonight is an incredibly talented young man who proves that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most beautiful hearts. Please welcome Dylan Martinez." The applause was thunderous as Dylan walked onto the stage. He was nervous. That was obvious from the way his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his guitar strap. But there was something else in his eyes, something deeper than stage fright, a weight that seemed too heavy for someone so young to carry. Dylan had sandy brown hair that caught the stage lights, and he wore a simple white button-down shirt and dark jeans. His guitar was clearly well-loved, worn smooth in places where countless hours of practice had left their mark. But what struck everyone watching was his smile. It was genuine, but tinged with a sadness that made you want to know his story. "Dylan?" Jimmy called out, walking over to shake his hand. "Man, it's so great to have you here. How are you feeling?" "Honestly, Jimmy," Dylan replied, his voice steady despite his visible nerves, "I never thought I'd be standing on this stage. This is incredible." The interview portion went beautifully. Dylan talked about his music, his hometown, and the video that had brought him to national attention. Jimmy was in his element, asking the right questions, making Dylan laugh, creating those moments of connection that made great television. The audience was charmed by Dylan's humility and obvious talent. "So, tell us about the song you're going to perform tonight," Jimmy said, settling back into his interview posture. Dylan's expression shifted slightly. "It's called Letters to Heaven, and it's about my mom. She passed away from cancer 6 months ago." The studio audience let out a collective sympathetic murmur. Jimmy's smile became more gentle, more understanding. "I'm so sorry for your loss, man. That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was," Dylan nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "But she was amazing until the very end, always thinking about others, always trying to make people smile even when she was in pain." Jimmy leaned forward slightly. "She sounds like an incredible woman." "She was," Dylan said simply. "And actually, Jimmy, before I perform, there's something I need to tell you, something I need to share." Something in Dylan's tone made Jimmy pause. The studio audience sensed the shift too, their chatter dying down to near silence. The cameras caught the moment perfectly, the subtle change in Jimmy's expression, the way he straightened in his chair, instinctively knowing that this wasn't part of the plan to interview anymore. "Of course," Jimmy said softly. "What's on your mind?" Dylan reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was clearly old, worn soft from being handled many times. The edges were slightly yellowed, and you could see where tears had stained parts of it. "This is a letter my mom wrote to me before she died," Dylan said, his voice beginning to shake. "But it's not what you think. It's not just for me. Part of it is for you." The studio fell completely silent. Jimmy's professional smile faded, replaced by genuine confusion and growing concern. This wasn't in any script. This wasn't planned. The producers in the control room leaned forward in their chairs, unsure whether to cut to commercial. "For me?" Jimmy asked quietly. Dylan nodded, unfolding the letter carefully. "My mom was in the hospital for 3 months before she passed. Every night, even when the pain was really bad, she would watch The Tonight Show. She said your laugh made her feel like there was still joy in the world." Jimmy's hand went to his chest involuntarily. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Dylan continued, his voice growing stronger, even as tears began to form in his eyes. "She wrote this letter 2 weeks before she died. She made me promise that if I ever got the chance, if I ever made it onto your show, I would read it to you." The camera operators, who had filmed thousands of hours of television, found themselves adjusting their shots without being prompted. This was no longer an interview. This was something sacred unfolding in real time. "Dylan," Jimmy said softly, "you don't have to." "I want to," Dylan interrupted, looking directly at Jimmy. "She wanted me to. Jimmy, can I read you what my mom wrote?" Jimmy nodded, unable to find his voice. The studio audience was completely still, 300 people holding their collective breath. Dylan unfolded the letter completely and began to read, his voice clear and strong despite the tears now streaming down his face. "Dear Jimmy Fallon," he began, "you don't know me, but you've been in my room every night for the past 3 months. You've been the last voice I hear before I try to sleep, and your laughter has been the soundtrack to some of my darkest hours." Jimmy's eyes immediately filled with tears. His hand covered his mouth as he listened. "I'm writing this letter because I want you to know that you've given me something precious in these final weeks. You've given me joy, real, genuine joy every time you laugh, every time you seem genuinely delighted by your guests. Every time you mess up and laugh at yourself, you remind me that happiness still exists, even in places where it seems impossible." The camera caught Jimmy's face as he listened. His usual animated expressions had given way to something much more raw and vulnerable. Tears were openly flowing now, and he made no attempt to hide them. Dylan continued reading, his own voice breaking. "I know you're just doing your job, entertaining people, but what you're really doing is healing them. You're reminding them how to laugh, how to find light in the darkness. You probably think you're just being silly, but you're actually being a ministry." Behind the scenes, the producers made the decision to keep rolling. Every instinct told them this was bigger than entertainment. This was humanity unfolding in its purest form. "Jimmy," Dylan read on, "I'm dying, but I'm not sad tonight because I got to laugh with you one more time. My son Dylan is incredibly talented, and if he's reading this to you, it means he made it. It means dreams still come true. Please tell him that watching him pursue his music has been the greatest joy of my life, and that his voice carries my love everywhere he goes." The studio audience was crying now, not politely dabbing at their eyes, but openly weeping. Jimmy had risen from his chair and was walking toward Dylan, his own composure completely abandoned. "But mostly, Jimmy, I want to thank you for being exactly who you are, for laughing when things are funny, for caring about people's stories, for making television that feels like friendship. You've sat with me through every treatment, every sleepless night, every moment when I thought I couldn't take another breath. You've been my companion in ways you'll never know." Jimmy reached Dylan and without hesitation pulled him into a hug. The letter crumpled slightly between them, but neither cared. They stood there, two men sharing a grief and a gratitude that transcended the artificial boundaries of television. "Please keep laughing, Jimmy. Please keep being the light you are. And please tell my son that he has his mother's heart and his own incredible gift, The world needs his music, just like it needs your laughter. Jimmy pulled back slightly, keeping his hands on Dylan's shoulders. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but the microphones caught every word. "Dylan," he said to your mom, "she didn't just write you a letter, she wrote me one too. And I need you to know something. What she said about me being her companion, that works both ways. Because right now, in this moment, she's here. She's in this studio, in your voice, in your music, in the love that made you drive 18 hours to keep a promise." The audience rose to their feet in spontaneous applause, but it wasn't the usual enthusiastic clapping. It was the kind of applause that recognizes something sacred, something that transcends entertainment. Jimmy walked back to his desk, but instead of sitting behind it, he perched on the edge facing Dylan. "You know what? We're not doing a normal performance tonight. This isn't about ratings or viral moments or any of that. This is about honoring your mother and the promise you made." He turned to address the audience directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we just experienced isn't just television. It's a reminder of why we're all here, why we gather together, why we seek connection." Dylan's mother understood something that all of us sometimes forget, that laughter and music and human connection are the most powerful forces in the universe. Jimmy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white card. "Dylan, this is my personal card. Not my manager's, not my publicist's, mine. And I want you to know that your mother's words, her letter, it's going to change how I approach every show from now on. Because now I know I'm not just entertaining people, I'm sitting with them through their hardest moments." Dylan took the card with trembling hands, but Jimmy wasn't finished. "I want to do something," Jimmy said, turning to his production team. "We're setting up a scholarship fund tonight in honor of Dylan's mother, because she understood that music and laughter have the power to heal, and we want to make sure other young artists get the chance to share that healing with the world." The applause was thunderous now, but Jimmy raised his hand for quiet. "But first, Dylan, I need you to perform your song. Not for us, not for the cameras, but for her. Because she's listening and she needs to hear her son's voice one more time." Dylan wiped his eyes and picked up his guitar. As he adjusted the microphone stand, Jimmy made one final gesture that would be remembered forever. He took off his suit jacket, the same jacket he wore for every show, his lucky jacket, and gently draped it around Dylan's shoulders. "From one friend to another," Jimmy said quietly. Dylan began to play, and the song that filled Studio 6B wasn't just music. It was love made audible, grief transformed into beauty, a mother's final message carried on her son's voice. Every note seemed to hang in the air longer than possible. Every word carried the weight of promise, kept, and love eternal. As Dylan sang, Jimmy sat at his desk with tears streaming down his face, no longer concerned about cameras or appearances. He was simply present, simply human, simply grateful to be part of this moment where television had become something much more profound. The song ended in silence. Not the silence of an audience unsure how to react, but the silence of reverence, of recognition that they had just witnessed something sacred. When the applause finally came, it lasted nearly 5 minutes, and through it all, Jimmy and Dylan embraced again, two men connected by a letter from heaven. When the show finally ended and the cameras stopped rolling, Jimmy didn't rush off to his dressing room as usual. He stayed on stage with Dylan, reading the letter again, learning about Dylan's mother, sharing his own stories of loss and love. The crew quietly cleaned up around them, understanding that some conversations are more important than schedules. Later, Jimmy would say, in interviews, that Dylan's mother had taught him something he'd never fully understood, that entertainment at its best isn't about making people forget their troubles. It's about reminding them they're not alone in carrying them. The scholarship fund they established that night raised over $3 million in its first year. But more importantly, Dylan's mother's letter became a reminder to millions of viewers that behind every smile, every laugh, every moment of joy, there are real people whose lives are touched and changed by the simple act of human connection. Dylan went on to record an album dedicated to his mother's memory. The title track, Letters to Heaven, became a chart topper, but more importantly, it became an anthem for anyone who had ever lost someone they loved. And every time Dylan performed it, he wore Jimmy's jacket, a symbol of the night when a talk show became a sanctuary and laughter became love. Jimmy kept Dylan's mother's letter framed in his office, not as a trophy, but as a daily reminder of why he did what he did. Because sometimes making someone laugh isn't just entertainment, sometimes it's ministry. Sometimes it's exactly what a mother praying in a hospital room needs, to believe that joy still exists in the world. And sometimes late at night when the studio lights dimmed and the audience went home, Jimmy would read that letter again and remember that television at its very best isn't about the host or the guests or even the audience. It's about the moments when all the barriers fall away and we remember what it means to be human together. The video of that night spread across the internet within hours, not as entertainment, but as something deeper. Comments poured in from people sharing their own stories of loss, of finding comfort in unexpected places, of moments when strangers became family. Hospital workers wrote about patients who found strength in laughter during their darkest hours. Mothers and fathers shared how Dylan's courage to honor his mother's memory inspired them to be more present with their own children. 6 months later, Dylan released a book containing all the letters his mother had written to him during her illness. The proceeds funded music therapy programs in children's hospitals across the country. Jimmy wrote the foreword, describing that night as the moment he understood his true calling. The Tonight Show continued, but something fundamental had shifted. Jimmy approached each show knowing that somewhere, in a hospital room or a lonely apartment or a place where hope seemed impossible, someone was listening not just for entertainment, but for a reminder that joy still existed, that laughter was still possible, that connection could bridge any distance, even the distance between earth and heaven. Every year on the anniversary of Dylan's mother's death, Jimmy would end his monologue the same way. Tonight, we're laughing for everyone who needs to remember what joy sounds like. And in living rooms and hospital rooms across America, people would smile through their tears knowing they weren't alone.